Commander Peter Walsh stood at the entrance of the massive Galactic Council chamber, straightening his dark blue Earth Defense Fleet uniform. The silver stripes on his shoulders caught the purple light streaming in through the tall windows. This was humanity's first time presenting to the Council's military committee, and he could already feel the judgment from the alien representatives. The chamber itself was enormous, with ceiling heights that could fit a small spacecraft. Curved rows of seats rose up like a stadium, filled with representatives from over 30 spacefaring species. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few were even gaseous beings contained in special environment suits. The human representative may now approach, announced High Counselor Zexthar, his crystalline body glowing with what seemed like barely contained impatience. The alien's voice translator made his words sound like metal scraping against stone. Peter walked forward, his footsteps echoing in the quiet chamber. He could hear whispers and clicks from the gathered aliens. Many were looking at his uniform with what he recognized as amusement. They'd probably thought the cloth material was primitive compared to their energy-based protective wear. "We have reviewed Earth's application to join the military committee," Zexthar continued. "While your species has achieved faster-than-light travel, your combat technology appears basic." The last word carried clear disdain. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing images of Earth's newest battleship, the U.S. Valiant. Peter noticed several council members making what he assumed were laughing gestures. "They still use physical projectile weapons," commented a jellyfish-like being floating in a gravity pod. "How quaint." Peter took a deep breath. He had expected this reaction. "Distinguished council members, I understand your skepticism. However, I believe you'll find our approach to warfare uniquely effective." From his position in the upper rows, military advisor John Martinez watched with interest. Unlike the others, he had studied Earth's military history in detail. The human concept of combined arms warfare and their tendency to keep improving obsolete technology alongside new developments had caught his attention. "Your ships still carry railguns," observed a reptilian representative, their forked tongue flicking out in apparent amusement. "Our energy shields have made such weapons obsolete for over 300 cycles." Peter activated his own holographic display, showing the Valiant's main gun in action. "This isn't just a railgun, council members. Our Mark VII magnetic acceleration cannon can launch a variety of projectiles at 30% light speed. The kinetic energy—" "Irrelevant," interrupted Zexthar. "Modern shields can absorb any kinetic impact. That is basic physics." The human commander fought back a smile. They hadn't yet understood that this was exactly why human weapons might be so effective. Their over-reliance on energy shields had created a blind spot. In the observation gallery, Lieutenant Susan Bradley watched the proceedings with growing frustration. She had seen the test results of their weapons against captured alien shield technology. But the Council's arrogance was preventing them from seeing the potential threat, or advantage, that human military technology represented. "Perhaps a demonstration would be more convincing," Peter suggested carefully. "We would be happy to participate in the upcoming military exercises." This caused a stir in the chamber. The annual war games were considered a prestigious event, where the most advanced ships demonstrated their capabilities. The idea of including primitive human vessels seemed almost insulting to some members. "You would pit your projectile weapons against our phase cannons and plasma torpedoes." A gas cloud being pulsed with what seemed like incredulity. "Yes," Peter replied simply. "We believe we can offer valuable tactical innovations to the Council's combined fleet." John Martinez leaned forward in his seat. This was getting interesting. He had seen classified reports about human ships' performance against pirate vessels using stolen Council technology. The pirates had been equally confident in their superior shields, right up until the moment they learned how little those shields did against tungsten rods moving at relativistic speeds. Zexthar's crystalline form pulsed with bright colors as he consulted with other senior members. After what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. "Very well. The Council will permit one human vessel to participate in the exercises. But be warned, Any damage to Council ships will be extremely costly for Earth to repair. Peter nodded respectfully, but inside he was grinning. They still didn't understand. Human weapons weren't designed to damage ships. They were designed to destroy them. Those fancy energy shields might stop plasma bolts and laser beams, but they had never been designed to handle good old-fashioned kinetic energy weapons enhanced by modern technology. As the session ended, Peter met with John Martinez in a private chamber. The advisor's serpentine body coiled comfortably in his hover chair as they discussed the meeting. "They're underestimating you," Martinez observed, his scaled face showing what Peter had learned to recognize as amusement. "Just like the Mindarin Empire underestimated my people before their shields failed against asteroids accelerated to near-light speed. History has shown that technological superiority doesn't always guarantee victory," Peter replied. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective." Back on the U.S. Valiant, orbiting the Council station, Lieutenant Bradley was already preparing for the exercises. The ship's primitive railguns were being loaded with special training rounds, still capable of demonstrating their power, but without the risk of actually destroying the Council's ships. "They think we're bringing knives to a gunfight," she told her crew during the briefing. "They don't realize we're actually bringing artillery to a laser-like show." As Peter walked through the Valiant's corridors that evening, he reflected on humanity's unique path to the stars. While other races had abandoned physical weapons for energy-based ones, humans had continued to develop both. While they mastered plasma cannons and laser arrays, they never stopped improving their ballistic weapons, missiles, and kinetic kill vehicles. The Council would soon learn that humanity's primitive technology was anything but obsolete. Sometimes, the old ways were still the best ways, especially when enhanced by centuries of continuous improvement. In his quarters, Peter reviewed the upcoming exercise scenarios. The Council races relied heavily on their energy shields, which could indeed stop nearly any energy weapon. But they had never faced weapons that used pure kinetic energy delivered with the precision of modern targeting systems and the power of advanced electromagnetic acceleration. Soon, very soon, they would learn why humanity had never abandoned the primitive art of throwing really heavy objects really fast at their enemies. And perhaps then, they would understand that true military innovation wasn't about abandoning the old for the new, but about finding ways to make them work together. The emergency alarms blared through the Galactic Council station just 3 days before the scheduled military exercises. Lieutenant Susan Bradley was in the middle of a tactical briefing when the alert came through. Crystal vessels detected in the Proxima Colony sector. The AI announcement echoed through every corridor. Multiple civilian casualties reported. Council Defense Fleet responding. In the main chamber, the Council members gathered in an emergency session. The massive holographic display showed a grim scene. 15 Crystal warships were attacking the colony's orbital stations. The insectoid race had been a persistent threat to Council space for years, but they had never been this bold before. "Our response fleet will arrive in 30 minutes, reported Admiral Zycon, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. But the colony's shields are already failing. Commander Peter Walsh stood at the back of the chamber, watching the situation unfold. The Crystal ships were using standard energy weapons, the exact kind of attacks that Council shields were designed to stop. Yet somehow, they were breaking through. "They've adapted their plasma cannons," one analyst explained. "The frequency modulation is allowing them to bypass our standard shields." Susan Bradley couldn't stay quiet any longer. She stepped forward, breaking protocol. "The U.S. Valiant can reach the colony in 10 minutes. We request permission to assist." The chamber erupted in dismissive chittering and buzzing. High Counselor Zexthar's crystalline form pulsed with angry colors. "This is not your concern, human. Our fleet will handle this threat." With respect, Peter joined in. "We're watching civilians die while we debate. The Valiant is ready for combat." John Martinez, the military advisor, slithered forward in his hover chair. "Let them try. What do we have to lose? The council members argued for precious minutes before Zexthar finally relented. "Very well, but do not interfere with our fleet when it arrives." Susan was already running to the Valiant's shuttle before the approval came through. Within minutes, she was on the bridge, and the ship was breaking orbit. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing their primitive weapons for real combat. "Load the main guns with standard kinetic penetrators," she ordered. "Prepare missile pods 1 through 4, and get me a full scan of those crystal ships." The Valiant dropped out of FTL just outside the colony's orbital space. The scene was chaos. 3 orbital stations were already breaking apart, their shield generators overwhelmed by the modified crystal weapons. Escape pods scattered in every direction. "Enemy ships are ignoring us," reported the sensor officer. "They don't consider us a threat." Susan allowed herself a small smile. "Big mistake. Target the nearest ship. Let's show them what kinetic weapons can do to their fancy shields." The Valiant's main gun, a massive electromagnetic accelerator running the length of the ship, hummed to life. It was loaded with a solid tungsten rod, 20 feet long and dense enough to punch through meters of armor. The targeting computer adjusted for the enemy ship's movement, calculating the perfect trajectory. Fire. The shot was almost invisible to the naked eye, moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The crystal ship's shields flared brilliantly as the rod approached, and then failed completely as the projectile carried too much kinetic energy for the energy-based barrier to handle. The rod punched through the ship from bow to stern, leaving a clean hole that vented atmosphere and crew into space. "Holy shit," breathed John Martinez, watching from the council chamber. "They actually did it." The crystal fleet finally noticed the Valiant. 3 ships broke off their attack on the colony and turned to face the human vessel, their weapons charged, preparing to fire the same shield-breaking plasma bolts that had been so effective against the colony. "They're still thinking in terms of energy weapons," Susan observed. "Launch missile spread, pattern Delta. Let's give them something else to think about." The Valiant's missile pods opened, releasing clouds of what looked like simple rockets. The crystal ships easily shot down the first wave with their point defense lasers, their crews probably laughing at such an ancient weapon. They weren't laughing when the destroyed missiles released clouds of metallic chaff that played havoc with their targeting systems. They definitely weren't laughing when the second wave of missiles, hidden in the sensor noise of the first, slammed into their hulls. "Basic physics," Susan explained to her crew. "You can have the best energy shields in the galaxy, but they don't do much against good old-fashioned kinetic energy and shrapnel." The remaining crystal ships began to retreat, but the Valiant wasn't finished. 2 more shots from the main gun disabled another ship's engines. The Council's defense fleet arrived to find 3 enemy ships destroyed, 2 disabled, and the rest fleeing at maximum speed. Back in the Council chamber, the mood had shifted dramatically. The holographic replay of the battle showed clearly how humanity's obsolete weapons had torn through defenses that had been considered state-of-the-art. Their primary weapon, Zexthar spoke slowly, it was just throwing things very fast. "Essentially, yes," Peter replied. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Energy shields are amazing against energy weapons, but they struggle with pure kinetic impact. It's why we never stop developing physical weapons alongside energy-based ones." John Martinez was already compiling a report for the Council's military committee. "The Crixtal adapted their weapons to bypass our shields because they expected us to adapt our shields in response. They never expected anyone to simply hit them with something solid moving at relativistic speeds." The Council chambers buzzed with excited discussion. Species that had long looked down on primitive physical weapons were suddenly very interested in human military technology. The jellyfish-like being who had laughed at railguns earlier was now asking detailed questions about tungsten rod manufacturing. Susan Bradley returned to the station a hero. The Valiant had saved thousands of lives at the colony, and more importantly, had demonstrated that humanity's approach to warfare wasn't primitive. It was pragmatic. The exercises are still on for next week, Peter told her during the debriefing. But I think the Council's ships might be a bit more cautious about dismissing our capabilities now. Good, Susan replied with a grin. Because we didn't even show them our more advanced weapons yet. Wait until they see what happens when we combine our kinetic weapons with some of their energy technology. As news of the battle spread through Council space, many military leaders began to reassess their defensive strategies. The Krixtal had proved that pure energy shields could be defeated by modified energy weapons, but humanity had proved something perhaps more important. Sometimes the best way to win wasn't to engage in an arms race, but to think differently about the problem entirely. In his private chambers, High Counselor Zexthar reviewed the battle footage again and again. Each time, he found himself more impressed by the elegant simplicity of the human approach. Perhaps, he realized, it was time for the Council to learn from these newcomers rather than dismiss them. The upcoming military exercises were suddenly looking much more interesting than anyone had anticipated. The Council's military training grounds stretched across an entire solar system. Empty planets and asteroids served as targets, while specialized sensor arrays recorded every detail of weapons testing. 1 week after the Krixtal attack, the U.S. Valiant floated among ships from 20 different species, preparing for the demonstration exercises. Catherine Miller, the weapons systems specialist, stood at her station on the Valiant's bridge. Through the main viewport, she could see the sleek forms of Council vessels, their hulls gleaming with energy shield patterns. After their success against the Krixtal, the other ships kept a respectful distance. All stations report ready, she announced to Lieutenant Susan Bradley. Our new hybrid weapon system is online. Commander Peter Walsh watched from the Council's observation post alongside John Martinez and various alien officials. The chamber was much more crowded than usual. News of the Valiant's performance had attracted military observers from across Council space. The first test will demonstrate our standard kinetic weapons. Susan's voice came through the command channel. Target is the decommissioned battlecruiser at Mark 35. The target ship was an old Council vessel, its shields still functioning but powered down. At Susan's command, they powered up to full strength, creating a familiar blue bubble around the hull. Impressive barriers, Catherine noted, scanning the shield strength. But they're still designed to stop energy weapons, not mass. The Valiant's main gun rotated into position. This time, the Council observers watched with intense interest rather than dismissal. The electromagnetic coils charged, creating a low hum that vibrated through the ship. Standard kinetic penetrator away, Catherine reported. The tungsten rod had accelerated to terrifying speed. When it hit the target's shields, there was no dramatic explosion. Instead, the rod simply passed through, its enormous kinetic energy overwhelming the energy barrier's ability to resist physical objects. It punched through the target ship's hull like paper, leaving clean entry and exit holes. As you can see, Peter explained to the stunned observers, energy shields are excellent at stopping energy weapons, but they struggle with simple physics. The kinetic energy of a dense object moving at extreme speeds is harder to stop than any plasma bolt. But this was just the beginning. Susan's voice came through again. Now for the hybrid demonstration. Catherine, show them what happens when we combine our technology with Council advances. Catherine's fingers flew over her control panel. The main gun hummed again, but this time the tungsten rod was surrounded by a strange energy field. We've adapted your phase shift technology, Peter explained. But instead of using it in shields, we're using it to make our projectiles even more effective. The new round fired. This time, when it hit the target's shields, something extraordinary happened. The energy field around the rod created a momentary phase variance in the shields, and in that split second, the rod's kinetic energy was multiplied rather than resisted. The result was spectacular. The target ship didn't just get punctured. It split completely in half. The phase field creates a resonance effect, Catherine explained over the comm. It turns the shield's own energy against it, while allowing our kinetic weapon to maintain its physical impact. The result is exponentially more devastating than either technology alone. In the observation chamber, the alien officials were completely silent. John Martinez's scales rippled with what might have been approval. But wait, Susan called out. There's more. Catherine, demonstrate the countermeasure system. This was something they'd developed after studying the Crystal attack. The Valiant launched what looked like simple missiles toward a new target. When the target's point defense systems fired, the missiles released clouds of energized particles. The particles are phase-matched to enemy weapon frequencies, Catherine explained. They create localized interference that can temporarily disrupt energy weapons. Combined with our kinetic weapons, it lets us create corridors of conventional attack through even the heaviest energy defenses. The demonstration continued for several hours. The Valiant showed off system after system that combined human primitive technology with advanced alien principles. There were kinetic scatter bombs that used phase technology to multiply their effectiveness, shield-piercing rounds that could adjust their physical properties mid-flight, and more. The key, Peter explained to the increasingly impressed council members, is that we never stop developing our old technology. While others abandoned physical weapons for energy-based ones, we kept improving both. This lets us create combinations no one else had thought to try. In her weapons station, Catherine felt pride as she saw the sensor readings from the observer ships. They were all scanning the Valiant intensely, trying to understand how such simple principles could be so effective. It's not about having the most advanced technology, she told her crew. It's about using what you have in smart ways. A rock thrown at the right speed can do more damage than the fanciest laser. The final demonstration involved a swarm of small automated drones. Each carried a tiny kinetic weapon and phase generator. Working together, they could create gaps in enemy defenses or concentrate their fire for devastating effect. These drones cost a fraction of what a single energy cannon costs, Susan explained. But used properly, they can disable ships worth hundreds of times more. That's human efficiency. When the exercise ended, the Valiant had destroyed or disabled every target in ways that the Council's military experts had previously thought impossible. More importantly, they had demonstrated that humanity's approach to warfare wasn't primitive. It was pragmatic and innovative. Your species, John Martins said to Peter after the demonstration, has done something remarkable. You've shown that true advancement doesn't mean abandoning the old ways, but finding new ways to use them. In the following briefing, Catherine presented detailed technical data about their hybrid weapons. The Council's military engineers were especially interested in how humans had managed to combine physical and energy-based systems so effectively. Sometimes the best solutions are the simple ones, she explained. Energy weapons are great, but there's nothing quite like good old-fashioned kinetic impact. When you add advanced technology to that basic principle, you get something really special. The demonstration changed the Council's entire approach to military technology. Species that had long seen physical weapons as obsolete began researching new ways to combine them with their energy-based systems. The human concept of hybrid warfare, using both old and new technologies together, was about to revolutionize galactic combat doctrine. As the Valiant's crew prepared to return to their regular duties, they knew they had done more than just show off their capabilities. They had proven that humanity's unique approach to technological development, never abandoning the old while embracing the new, had much to teach the galactic community. 2 weeks after the weapons demonstration, Richard Parker stood before the Council's Military Advisory Board. The Tactical Advisors' presentation room was packed with representatives from every major spacefaring race. Even species that usually sent junior observers had dispatched their highest-ranking military officials. Today, we'll discuss something even more important than our weapons, Richard began, his voice calm and clear. We're going to talk about how humans think about space combat. The holographic display behind him showed a familiar sight: the battle against the Crixful ships. But this time, the footage focused on something different: the Valiant's heat signature, or rather, its lack of one. First principle of human space combat: they can't hit what they can't see. Richard explained. Notice how our ship seems to disappear from thermal sensors. We call this heat masking. A jellyfish-like council member floated forward in its gravity pod. But your engines must produce heat. It's impossible to hide that in space. Richard smiled. Not impossible. Just tricky. He pressed a button, and the display showed the complex system of heat sinks and radiator panels that covered the Valiant's hull. We store our heat in special tanks and release it in controlled bursts that look like background radiation. Old technology, but very effective. John Martinez, watching from his usual spot, nodded in approval. The council races had always focused on making their ships more powerful. Humans had instead worked on making their ships harder to detect. Next, let's talk about electronic warfare, Richard continued. He showed footage of the Valiant's missile attack, but now highlighting the invisible electronic battle that had taken place. While the Krixtal were busy shooting down our first wave of missiles, we were mapping their entire sensor network through their reactions. The display showed how each Krixtal response revealed something about their detection systems. The human computers had analyzed these patterns in real time, finding weak points and blind spots. We didn't just overwhelm their defenses, Richard explained. We learned from them, adapted to them, and then exploited them. Every shot they fired taught us more about how to defeat them. A reptilian council member hissed in surprise. Your computers can analyze enemy patterns that quickly. Human combat doctrine is based on adaptation, Richard replied. Our systems are designed to learn and adjust in real time. We assume that any advantage we have will be temporary, so we're always looking for new ones. The presentation moved on to drone warfare. The room watched as simulated battles played out, showing how human drone swarms could overwhelm even the most sophisticated defense systems. These drones aren't particularly advanced, Richard noted. Their power comes from how they work together. Each drone shares what it learns with the others. If one finds a weakness, they all exploit it. If one finds a strong defense, they all avoid it. He showed how the drones could split into smaller groups, each with different tasks. Some would probe defenses, others would create distractions, while others would slip through any gaps they found. But surely such simple machines can be easily destroyed, another council member argued. Of course they can, Richard agreed. But there are always more drones. Each one costs less than a single shot from a heavy energy cannon. Losing them is part of the strategy. The display showed how destroyed drones would create clouds of debris that interfered with enemy sensors. Even in death, they served a tactical purpose. This brings us to another key principle. Every action should serve multiple purposes, Richard continued. When we fire our kinetic weapons, the missed shots become navigation hazards that restrict enemy movement. When our missiles are destroyed, their fragments become sensor baffles. We waste nothing. The council members watched intently as Richard explained how human ships coordinated their actions. Unlike the rigid command structures of council fleets, human ships operated with what he called tactical flexibility. Each ship captain has clear mission objectives, but is free to choose how to achieve them, he explained. This lets us adapt quickly to changing situations. No need to wait for orders from higher up. Commander Peter Walsh, standing at the back of the room, remembered how this had confused the council during the Krixtal battle. They had expected the Valiant to wait for explicit permission before each action. Instead, Lieutenant Bradley had acted on her own initiative, seizing opportunities as they appeared. But how do you maintain fleet coordination with such independence? Asked a crystalline being. We call it commander's intent, Richard explained. Every crew member understands not just what they're supposed to do, but why they're doing it. This lets them make informed decisions when situations change. The presentation moved on to show how human ships used natural phenomena in combat. They would hide in asteroid fields, use planetary magnetic fields to mask their signatures, and even ride solar wind currents to save fuel. Space isn't empty, Richard noted. It's full of things we can use to our advantage. Gravity, radiation, dust clouds. They're all tools if you know how to use them. John Martinez's scales rippled with interest as Richard explained how human ships could use a star's radiation to blind enemy sensors or hide in the shadow of a planet to mask their approach. "Now let's discuss our most important tactical principle," Richard said, nearing the end of his presentation. "We call it asymmetric response. When faced with a stronger enemy, we don't try to match their strength. We find different ways to fight." The display showed various scenarios: small ships taking down larger ones, cheap weapons defeating expensive defenses, simple tactics overcoming complex strategies. If the enemy has better energy weapons, we use kinetic ones. If they have stronger shields, we find ways around them. If they have bigger ships, we use smaller, faster ones. We never fight the battle they're prepared for. As the presentation concluded, the council chamber buzzed with discussion. Species that had prided themselves on their advanced technology were beginning to understand that innovation wasn't just about having the newest weapons. It was about using them intelligently. "The Krixtal learned to bypass our shields," John Martinez observed to Peter. "But they're still thinking like energy weapon users. They haven't learned to think differently about combat itself." Peter nodded. "That's humanity's real contribution to galactic warfare. Not our weapons, but our way of thinking about how to use them." As the council members filed out, many were already discussing how to incorporate human tactical doctrines into their own military forces. They had come expecting to learn about weapons, but they had learned something far more valuable: a new way of thinking about space combat itself. 1 month after the tactical presentation, the Galactic Council's main chamber looked very different. Where there had once been skeptical stares and dismissive gestures, now there was eager attention. Amanda Harris, head of Earth's Defense Research Division, stood at the center of it all. "The Joint Technology Exchange Program is ready to begin," she announced, her voice steady despite the historic importance of the moment. "Earth is prepared to share our kinetic weapon designs, and we look forward to learning from the Council's energy weapon expertise." High Counselor Zexthar's crystalline form glowed with approval. "The Council agrees. Recent events have shown us that there is much we can learn from each other." The massive display screens showed the first project, a new class of hybrid warship. Its sleek hull combined Council energy shield technology with human-style heat management systems. The weapon ports could launch both plasma bolts and kinetic penetrators. "We call it the Concordat class," Amanda explained, "a true combination of human and Council engineering." In the upper galleries, Commander Peter Walsh watched with pride. Just 2 months ago, he had stood in this same chamber while the Council mocked human technology. Now they were building ships together. "The first 3 ships will begin construction next week," Amanda continued. "Each member race is welcome to send engineers to participate and learn." John Martinez slithered forward in his hover chair. "The military committee has reviewed the design. We believe these ships will be more effective than anything currently in service." The changes weren't just in shipbuilding. Throughout Council space, military doctrines were being rewritten. The rigid command structures were giving way to more flexible approaches based on human tactical principles. Lieutenant Susan Bradley had been promoted to commander and now led training exercises for mixed human Council crews. The valiant success had made her something of a celebrity among younger alien officers eager to learn human combat techniques. "The key is adaptability," she told a group of trainees during a simulation. "Your energy weapons are incredible, but you need backup plans. Sometimes the simple solution is the best one." Catherine Miller, the weapons specialist, was equally busy. She had teams of alien engineers constantly visiting her laboratory aboard the Valiant. They were fascinated by how humans had managed to combine basic physical principles with advanced technology. "Look at this," she said, showing them a new missile design. "Your phase shift technology makes our kinetic warheads twice as effective. And our guidance systems help your energy weapons hit targets more accurately. Together, we're better than either of us alone." The Krixtal had noticed the changes too. Their raids on Council space had become less frequent as reports spread about the new hybrid ships. Their old tactics of modifying energy weapons to bypass shields didn't work against vessels that could fight back in multiple ways. They're adapting, Richard Parker noted during a strategy meeting. But so are we. Every time they develop a new attack, we have more options to counter it. The Council's Strategic Defense Committee had been expanded to include a permanent human delegation. Peter Walsh now sat as a full member, his voice carrying equal weight with representatives from races that had been spacefaring for thousands of years. Humanity's greatest contribution wasn't their weapons, John Martin said during one session. It was their way of thinking. They showed us that progress isn't about abandoning the old for the new. It's about finding ways to use everything effectively. Amanda spent long hours in the research labs, working with scientists from dozens of species. Together, they developed new technologies that none of them could have created alone. Council energy expertise combined with human practical engineering produced innovations at an unprecedented rate. Every species has something to teach, she told her teams. The Council races know things about energy manipulation that we're just beginning to understand, and we can show them new ways to use their knowledge. The changes spread beyond the military. Council ships began adopting human-style heat management systems for better stealth. Human ships incorporated Council power systems for improved efficiency. Trade routes became safer as merchant ships carried both energy and kinetic defenses. On a viewing platform overlooking the shipyards, Peter watched the first Concordat-class vessel take shape. Its hull gleamed with the silvery sheen of human heat-dispersing panels, while Council energy conduits pulsed with blue light beneath. "It's beautiful," Susan said, joining him at the railing. "Not just the ship, what it represents. Real cooperation, real progress." "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Peter asked. "When we first arrived, they thought we were primitives." Susan laughed. "They learned what Earth children learn early. Don't judge a book by its cover." The shipyard was busy day and night. Teams of humans worked alongside aliens, sharing knowledge, solving problems together. The initial prejudices had faded as they discovered how much they could learn from each other. In her lab, Catherine put the finishing touches on a new hybrid weapon design. It combined a Council plasma containment field with a human kinetic launcher, creating something entirely new. She smiled, remembering how the Council engineers had once dismissed such combinations as impossible. "The universe is full of possibilities," she told her mixed team of human and alien technicians. "We just have to be willing to see them." The final proof of humanity's acceptance came when the Council announced plans to establish a joint military academy. The school would teach both human and Council combat doctrine, ensuring that future generations would grow up understanding both approaches. "The academy will be built in Earth orbit," Zexthar announced, "a symbol of our recognition that humanity has much to teach us." As Peter listened to the announcement, he thought about how far they had come. Humanity had arrived in Council space as newcomers, looked down upon for their primitive technology. Now they were full partners, respected not just for their weapons, but for their ideas. "The future looks bright," John Martin had said, coiling comfortably in his chair beside Peter. "And much more interesting than before humans arrived." Peter nodded, watching the construction of the new ships continue. The galaxy was changing, becoming stronger through the combination of different approaches and technologies. And it had all started because humans had never stopped throwing rocks. They had just gotten much, much better at it.